The silence in the car was stifling. I sat in the driver's seat, hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white, my gaze fixed on the house across the street. Brian and Jake sat beside me, each as tense and still as I was, our breaths shallow, barely moving. The clock on the dashboard blinked 11:23 p.m., casting a dim glow across our faces. It was almost time. But we stayed silent, the three of us, our attention locked on the glowing windows of that quiet suburban house, waiting for the betrayal I already knew was coming. My heart pounded in my chest like a hammer against steel. Tonight was the night I would face the truth about my wife, Mia, the woman I had loved, trusted, and believed in for years. I'd seen the changes in her, the strange work meetings and girls' nights out that didn't quite add up, the late-night texts she'd received from someone I didn't know. She'd smiled at those texts in ways she hadn't smiled at me in months. I'd dismissed it all at first, chalking it up to stress, to life pulling us in different directions. But deep down, I knew. My gut told me the truth before I'd even confirmed it. And then, one night, she'd left her phone unattended. I wasn't the kind of man to snoop, but something had compelled me. When I saw the messages from a man named Mark, explicit and filled with the kind of laughter we used to share, the kind of secrets we used to keep, my entire world imploded. That was when I knew I couldn't just sit back and ignore it. I needed proof, real proof, undeniable evidence that would leave no room for excuses. So I'd turned to my two closest friends, Brian and Jake, and told them everything. Their reactions were as strong as mine. They'd always seen Mia and me as a solid couple, the kind of partnership others admired. When they realized how easily she'd shattered that image, their rage mirrored mine. Brian had clenched his fists, muttering under his breath, while Jake had shaken his head, jaw clenched. "We'll help you, man," he'd said. And just like that, the plan was set in motion. So now we were here, watching, waiting for her betrayal to unfold in real time. I didn't know what to expect, but part of me hoped, prayed, even, that somehow, I was wrong. That I'd misinterpreted everything, and she would prove me wrong. But I knew, in the deepest part of my heart, that I wasn't. And as if on cue, I saw her silhouette appear in the window, followed by another shadow, a man's, moving toward her, his arm reaching out to pull her close. "That's him," I whispered, my voice barely more than a growl. "That's Mark." Beside me, Brian tensed, his gaze sharpening. Jake, sitting in the back seat, said nothing, but I could feel the anger radiating off him. We watched as Mia laughed, her head thrown back, her hand resting on Mark's chest, her body language intimate in a way that I hadn't seen with her in months. It was a sight that turned my stomach, filling me with a mixture of rage and heartache so potent that I almost couldn't breathe. But this wasn't the time to fall apart. No, tonight was about something far more important. Tonight, Mia and Mark would face the consequences of their betrayal. They'd laugh at my expense one last time before they would be plunged into the darkness of fear and regret that they had put me through. I glanced at Brian, who gave me a slight nod. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a pair of wire cutters, handing them to me with a firm expression. I didn't need to ask if he was sure. They'd been with me every step of the way, and tonight, they were as committed to this as I was. I opened the car door slowly, quietly, slipping into the night like a shadow. The chill in the air cut through my thin jacket, but the cold only sharpened my focus, made every nerve in my body come alive. With Jake and Brian following, I crept around the side of the house, where the electrical box was mounted on the wall. A few quick snips and the power lines were severed, plunging the house into pitch darkness. I could hear Mia and Mark's muffled voices from inside, their laughter cut off as confusion set in. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited in the shadows, listening to their every sound. "What happened to the lights?" I heard Mia say, her voice tense with surprise. "Probably a fuse," Mark replied, but I could hear the unease in his tone. In the quiet of the night, Jake leaned over, his voice low and edged with grim satisfaction. Time for phase 2. He reached into his own backpack, pulling out 6 smoke grenades. My pulse quickened as I took one, twisting the cap to activate it. This wasn't about hurting them physically, yet. This was about fear, about making them feel the helplessness I'd felt since I discovered their betrayal. I slipped back to the front door, crouching down as I rolled the grenade through the crack in the doorframe. It bounced softly on the floor inside, landing near the hallway, and a second later, white smoke began to pour from it, curling through the air, thickening as it spread. The effect was instant. Mia's calm, flirtatious tone vanished, replaced by panicked coughs and confused shouts. "Oh my God, what is that?" Mia's voice, usually so smooth and controlled, was shrill with fear. "Smoke. Get out of here." Mark's voice echoed, filled with desperation as he fumbled in the darkness. I took a step back, savoring the scene unfolding through the windows. There they were, my wife and her lover, lost, helpless, and terrified in the smoke, their once carefree evening turned into a nightmare they couldn't understand. "This is just the beginning," I muttered to myself, my voice steady with satisfaction. Brian and Jake were by my side, silent and resolute. I knew, in that moment, that they would never abandon me, that they understood this betrayal as if it were their own. As Mia's voice rose to a shriek inside, and Mark coughed violently, the satisfaction deepened within me. This wasn't about revenge anymore, this was about taking back control. And tonight, they were going to know exactly how it felt to be betrayed and abandoned in the dark. The smoke thickened, filling every inch of the house. I watched Mia and Mark's silhouettes from outside the window as they stumbled through the haze, their confusion turning to terror. The once familiar lines of her body language were now twisted with fear, her usually composed demeanor shattered by the disorienting chaos I'd unleashed. This wasn't the Mia I knew, the one who used to laugh with me, confide in me, share a life with me. No, this was a stranger, a woman who had crossed a line she could never come back from. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I glanced down. Brian had texted from his position by the back door, "Ready?" I glanced at Jake, who stood beside me, gripping another smoke grenade tightly. His jaw was set, his gaze focused. I nodded, and with a quick twist, I activated my phone's flashlight, letting a beam of light cut through the darkened night. We didn't need the light for ourselves, it was purely for effect, a way to add to the growing unease within that house. It was a signal, a warning, a promise that this nightmare was far from over. Inside, I heard Mia shout, her voice muffled through the glass. "Mark, do you see that? There's someone outside." Her tone held a tremor that hadn't been there before. She was no longer in control, no longer in her comfortable world of lies and secrets. Now, she was vulnerable, exposed, trapped in a situation she couldn't manipulate. And I was the one pulling the strings. "Stay calm," Mark tried to say, but his voice wavered, breaking under the pressure. I could see him fumbling around, trying to find an exit, but every door he tried was locked tight. Brian and Jake had made sure of that, securing the house as soon as we'd arrived. There was no escape, no way out until I decided to let them go. Jake leaned close to me, his voice barely a whisper. "Ready for the next move?" I didn't respond, just gave him a nod. He took a deep breath, his face set in a hard line, and moved silently to the side of the house. He was a pro at this sort of thing, and he knew exactly how to make an impact. He positioned himself by the window, just out of sight, and tossed the second grenade through a cracked open pane, letting the heavy smoke spill into the room. The effect was immediate. Mark began to cough violently, stumbling backward, trying to cover his mouth. Mia was clutching at his arm, her eyes wide, darting around the room, unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding around her. This wasn't just a prank, it was a calculated attack, designed to strip away every ounce of security and comfort she had once taken for granted. What is this?" she screamed, her voice shrill, cracking under the weight of her fear. Who would? Why would anyone do this? I took a step closer to the house, letting her catch a glimpse of me through the window. The moment her eyes met mine, she froze, her face draining of color. In that split second, I saw the realization hit her, the cold, hard truth seeping in. I knew. And I wasn't here to forgive or forget. She staggered back, pulling Mark with her. John? Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with a disbelief that bordered on hysteria. What? What are you doing here? I said nothing, just stood there, letting the weight of my silence crush her. I wanted her to feel every ounce of fear, every inch of the betrayal she had inflicted on me. This wasn't just about making her feel guilty, it was about showing her the depths of the devastation she'd caused. She was seeing the man she'd lied to, deceived, and discarded as if our life together had meant nothing. And now, I was the stranger standing outside her lover's home, ready to tear down every last wall she'd hidden behind. Mark, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to step forward, his face twisted with a mixture of anger and fear. Listen, man, this is insane. We don't need to do this. Just let us talk this out, all right? Talk? I replied, my voice cold, barely containing the rage simmering beneath the surface. Talk like you two talked behind my back. Like you laughed at me, shared secrets you thought I'd never uncover. He faltered, taken aback by the calm intensity in my voice. This wasn't the confrontation he'd prepared for. He had expected shouting, maybe a few threats, but he hadn't anticipated the controlled fury that now bore down on him. I took a step closer, forcing him to back up, pressing him further into the smoke-filled room. Mia reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to reason with me. John, please, this isn't what you think. We can work this out. I didn't mean for things to get this far, I just didn't mean. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the still night. You didn't mean to sneak around, didn't mean to betray the man who trusted you with everything? Tell me, Mia, how exactly does one accidentally destroy a marriage? Her eyes darted around, desperate, searching for some way out, some excuse that would absolve her of responsibility. But there was none. She was trapped, just as I had been trapped in the lie she'd constructed, forced to confront the truth without any means of escape. As she struggled to find words, Brian and Jake joined me, standing beside me, silent yet solid, their presence a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. They'd been by my side through every step, watching, helping, supporting me as I unraveled the lies and pieced together the painful reality of Mia's betrayal. Mark looked at them, his eyes narrowing with a mix of fear and suspicion. Who are these guys? What kind of sick joke is this? Oh, this is no joke, Jake replied, his tone deadly calm. We're just here to make sure justice is served. Justice? Mark scoffed, trying to laugh but failing as the fear crept back into his voice. You think this is justice? This is some sick, twisted revenge fantasy. No, Mark, I said, taking another step forward, this isn't a fantasy. This is reality. The reality that you thought you could avoid by sneaking around, by hiding in the shadows. But guess what? Shadows have a way of catching up with you. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension, with unspoken words, with the weight of every lie that had been told. And as I looked at Mia, at the woman I once thought I knew, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the fool. Without another word, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, dialing Mia's number. Her phone lit up on the coffee table, vibrating with the incoming call, a beacon of cold, hard reality cutting through the smoke. She stared at it, her face pale, her hands trembling as she finally understood that there was no way out. Answer it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. And as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the phone, I knew this was only the beginning of their nightmare. The phone's vibration cut through the dense silence in the room, filling the space with a low hum that seemed to echo off the walls. Mia's hand hovered above it, fingers trembling, her face a mix of shock and horror as she realized who was on the other end. She looked up at me through the window, her eyes pleading, desperate, searching for some trace of forgiveness or mercy. But there was none. "Answer it," I repeated, my voice steady, cold. I wanted her to feel the weight of this moment, to understand fully that this wasn't something she could talk her way out of. This was a reckoning, and there would be no escape. With a shaky hand, she picked up the phone, glancing at Mark, who stood frozen beside her, his own face drained of color. Slowly, she raised it to her ear, her voice coming out as a whisper. "Hello?" I let the silence stretch out, filling the air between us, making her wait. It was the same silence that had filled our home in recent months, the same silence I'd felt each time she'd lied to me, each time she'd walked out the door with some flimsy excuse about a work event or catching up with friends. Now, she was the one hanging in suspense, clinging to hope that somehow, this nightmare would end. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and measured. "Did you miss me, Mia?" She let out a small gasp, stumbling back a step, as if the words themselves had struck her. The fear in her eyes intensified, her gaze darting to Mark, who watched her with growing panic. She tried to respond, but her voice faltered, barely more than a whimper. "John, what are you doing?" "What am I doing?" I repeated, letting a bitter laugh slip out. "That's a funny question, Mia. I could ask you the same thing. What are you doing here, in this house, with him? Or better yet, what have you been doing all these nights when you said you were working late?" She swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Please, John, this isn't what it looks like. I can explain." "Explain?" I laughed again, a harsh sound that sliced through the night. "You think there's anything left for you to explain? I've seen enough, Mia. I know everything." Mark, who had been listening in shock, stepped forward, his face twisting with defiance. "Listen, man, this is insane. You don't need to do this. Whatever's going on between you and Mia, it's not my problem. Just, let us leave, and we'll be out of your life." I turned my gaze to him, feeling the rage bubble up in my chest. "Not your problem? You think you can just walk into my life, into my marriage, and walk away, when things get uncomfortable? You destroyed my life, my trust, my peace of mind. And now you're just going to walk away?" He faltered, shifting on his feet as he glanced back at Mia, who looked like she was about to break down. The confident, smug look he'd worn in all those texts and pictures I'd seen was gone, replaced by something more vulnerable, more uncertain. It was exactly what I wanted. "John, please," Mia's voice was softer now, pleading, her eyes filling with tears. "I made a mistake, okay? I got caught up in something that wasn't real. But I never meant to hurt you." I clenched my teeth, every word hitting me like a knife. A mistake? That's what she called it? Months of lies, of sneaking around, of throwing away everything we'd built together, reduced to a mistake? I felt my hands tremble with anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was the moment I'd waited for, and I wasn't going to let her squirm out of it with weak excuses. "Oh, it wasn't real, was it?" I said, my voice icy. "All those texts, those little meetings you had, none of it was real, right? Just a harmless fling, something you could erase like it never happened." But guess what, Mia, it was real enough for me. Real enough to destroy everything we had. She lowered her gaze, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her own guilt was finally sinking in. But as much as I wanted her to feel that weight, to know the pain she'd caused, I could see that she still didn't fully understand. She still thought there was a way out, that somehow, I'd forgive her, that this could all be fixed with apologies and tears. Mark, seeing her crumble, seemed to find some courage, stepping forward with a defiant look. "Look, this has gone far enough. You've made your point, all right? We get it. But this whole show you're putting on, it's not going to change anything. So why don't you just back off and let us go?" I turned to him, my gaze steady, my voice deadly calm. "You don't get it, do you, Mark? This isn't about me making a point. This is about consequences. You two thought you could do whatever you wanted, hide your little affair, laugh at me behind my back. But now you're both going to face the consequences of those choices." His defiance wavered, a flicker of fear crossing his face as he realized just how serious I was. But I didn't wait for a response. I motioned to Jake, who stepped forward, pulling another smoke grenade from his bag. He twisted the cap and tossed it through the open window, letting a fresh wave of thick, choking smoke fill the room. Mia's eyes widened in panic as the smoke enveloped her, her coughs mixing with Mark's as they staggered back, gasping for air. She clung to him, her expression wild, desperate, her voice barely audible as she choked out my name. "John, please. I can't breathe." I watched them struggle, the smoke swirling around them, filling the air with a dense, suffocating cloud. This was exactly how I'd felt in those moments of discovering her betrayal, strangled by confusion, suffocated by the weight of her lies. Now, it was her turn to feel that same helplessness, that same sense of impending doom. Brian leaned in close, his voice a low whisper. "You sure about this, man? She looks like she's breaking." I glanced at him, my gaze hard. "She deserves every second of this. She broke us, now it's her turn to break." Mia stumbled toward the door, pulling Mark with her, both of them coughing and choking, their faces twisted with fear. They barely managed to make it outside, where they collapsed on the grass, gasping for fresh air. Neighbors gathered nearby, whispering, watching the spectacle unfold, phones in hand, recording every second. The scene was everything I'd envisioned, her, exposed, humiliated, stripped of her control. She glanced up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes locking onto mine one last time. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, just a broken, silent plea. I took one last look at her, the woman I had once loved, the woman who had thrown it all away. "You wanted freedom, Mia?" I said, my voice a whisper carried by the night air. "Well, here it is. Enjoy it, because it's the only thing you'll have left." With that, I turned, Brian and Jake falling into step beside me. As we walked away, leaving her and Mark gasping in the darkness, I felt a strange, quiet satisfaction settle over me. It was over. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, I had taken it back, reclaimed my dignity, and walked away. Walking away that night felt like shedding a layer of skin, leaving behind the hurt, the betrayal, and the lies. The smoke, the panic, and Mia's desperate, broken expression stayed with me, replaying in my mind as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. It was over. The revenge had been delivered. But instead of the satisfaction I'd expected, an eerie silence crept in, filling the empty spaces where love and trust had once been. The next morning, the fallout began. I woke up to missed calls and a string of messages from people who had somehow already heard about the previous night. Small towns are notorious for rumors, and my marriage had apparently become the hottest topic overnight. Messages flooded in, sympathetic words, shock, disbelief. Friends, co-workers, even distant acquaintances expressed their support, their outrage at what Mia had done. They shared in my anger, and for a moment, it felt validating. I wasn't alone. But beneath the validation, I felt hollow, as if the anger had burned through me, leaving only ashes. Brian and Jake checked in regularly, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. They had been with me through every painful moment, but even they couldn't fill the emptiness. I spent the next few days in a daze, shifting between anger, relief, and sadness. Each day brought new texts from Mia, each more desperate than the last. She wanted to explain, wanted to make things right, but the words blurred together, meaningless, like apologies printed on thin paper, unable to hold the weight of what she'd done. I ignored her messages, left her calls unanswered, but her voice was like an echo in my mind, pleading and tearful. A part of me, some quiet, buried part, wanted to believe her, to go back to the days when her laughter filled our home, when her smile was for me and me alone. But I knew it was impossible. That life had died the moment I discovered her betrayal. On the fourth day, she showed up at my door. I heard the knock, faint and hesitant, and my heart lurched. I knew it was her without even checking. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, letting her stand out there, in the cold, just as I'd been left out in the cold by her lies. But my curiosity got the better of me. I needed to see her, one last time, to face the person she had become. I opened the door, and there she was, Mia, standing on my porch, wrapped in a coat, her eyes rimmed red, her face pale. She looked worn, exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. There was none of the confidence, none of the arrogance that I'd seen in her during those nights she'd slipped away to be with him. This was a woman on the edge, a woman who had lost everything. "John," she whispered, her voice barely audible, raw with emotion. "Please, just give me a minute. I need to talk to you. Just hear me out." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe, keeping the distance between us. "Fine," I said, my voice hard. "You've got 1 minute. Talk." She swallowed, glancing down, her hands wringing together. I don't know where to start. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But, please believe me when I say I never meant for any of this to happen. Never meant for it to happen. I repeated, the bitterness in my voice cutting through her words. You think that makes it better? You think that erases months of lies, of sneaking around, of disrespecting everything we built? Her shoulders slumped, and she shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. No, it doesn't. I know it doesn't. But I was stupid, John. I got caught up in something that wasn't real, something that made me feel different. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it. I laughed, a harsh sound that made her flinch. You didn't realize what you had? Mia, you knew exactly what you had. You just thought you'd never get caught. You thought you could have me, have him, have everything, without any consequences. She reached out, her hand trembling, but I stepped back, refusing to let her close the gap between us. John, please. Don't let it end like this. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I shook my head, feeling the weight of her words press down on me like stones. Love? I whispered, almost to myself. You call this love? Because from where I'm standing, all I see is selfishness, lies, and betrayal. Love doesn't destroy, Mia. Love doesn't tear apart everything in its path just for a little thrill. She let out a sob, covering her mouth, her whole body shaking. I wanted to feel something for her, pity, maybe even a shred of sympathy, but all I felt was numb. This woman, this stranger standing before me, wasn't the Mia I'd loved. She was someone else, someone who'd traded love for a moment of excitement, who'd taken everything we had and shattered it without a second thought. Please, John, she whispered, her voice breaking. Just give me a chance. I'll do anything. I'll make it right. I'll prove to you that I can change, that I can be the wife you deserve. I looked at her, at the tears streaming down her face, at the brokenness in her eyes. And for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of the love we once shared, the memories we'd built, the life we'd planned together. But then, the image of her with Mark, laughing, touching, betraying everything we had, came rushing back, and any softness I felt hardened into steel. It's too late, Mia, I said, my voice firm. There's nothing left to fix. You made your choice, and now you're facing the consequences. You wanted freedom, didn't you? You wanted excitement? Well, here it is. This is what your freedom looks like. You don't get to have both. She looked like she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She stared at me, her face crumbling, and in that moment, I knew that she finally understood. She understood that no amount of apologies, no promises to change, would undo the damage she'd done. She'd made her bed, and now she would lie in it, alone. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the driveway. I watched her go, feeling an odd sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. This was it. The final goodbye. The chapter was closed, and there was no going back. As I shut the door, the silence filled the space where she'd once been. It was an empty, quiet, almost peaceful silence, a stark contrast to the chaos she'd left behind. And as I stood there, alone in the house we'd once shared, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the lies, from the pain, from the twisted, broken love that had held me captive. The revenge was done, the confrontation over. Now, it was time to move forward, to rebuild, to reclaim the life I'd lost. The days that followed were a mixture of relief and disorientation. With Mia gone, it felt like I was living in a house full of ghosts, remnants of the life we'd built, echoes of laughter, silent reminders of broken promises in every corner. Each day I found myself stumbling into memories, each one tinged with a bitterness I couldn't shake. But I also knew this was the first step toward reclaiming myself, toward becoming whole again. Brian and Jake checked in daily, knowing that the weight of betrayal doesn't vanish overnight. One afternoon, Jake came by unannounced, carrying a duffel bag and a look of determination. He walked in, dropped the bag on the couch, and gave me a once-over. "You look like you could use a change of pace," he said, his voice firm. "I brought some gear. We're hitting the gym. You're not going to sit here and let this place eat you alive." I almost argued, almost gave in to the pull of my worn-out couch and the comfort of staying home. But he was right. I needed to do something, to move, to focus on anything other than the mess Mia had left behind. I changed into some workout clothes, laced up my shoes, and followed him out the door. The gym was bustling, full of the clanking of weights, the steady hum of treadmills, and people pushing themselves to their limits. Jake was relentless, guiding me through sets, challenging me to push harder, to focus my energy and anger into every rep. With each weight lifted, each muscle burning with effort, I felt a small part of the anger slip away. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start, a way to channel the darkness into something productive. By the time we finished, I was exhausted, drenched in sweat, but oddly at peace. Jake clapped me on the back, grinning. "That's more like it. You're stronger than this, John. Don't let her take that from you." That night, I sat alone in my living room, muscles sore but mind clearer than it had been in weeks. The memories still haunted me, but now they were starting to feel like part of a story I could close, a chapter one was ready to put behind me. I spent hours combing through our old photos, packing away the ones that brought back too much pain, erasing traces of her that lingered like shadows in every room. Each box I packed felt like reclaiming a small part of myself, as if I was rebuilding brick by brick. A week passed. Then two. Slowly, a new rhythm settled in. I started going to the gym regularly, reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in ages, picking up old hobbies I'd abandoned. I dusted off my old guitar, started playing again, letting the music fill the silence that had once felt so hollow. It was still quiet in the house, but it was a peaceful quiet now, one I had chosen. One evening, Brian invited me over to his place for a small gathering. Nothing extravagant, just a few friends, some drinks, a chance to unwind. I hesitated at first, not sure if I was ready to be social, but I knew he'd drag me out if I tried to refuse. So I went, bracing myself for the inevitable questions, the pitying glances. But when I arrived, I was surprised. My friends didn't look at me with pity, they welcomed me back with warmth, treating me like nothing had changed, as if I was still the same person I'd been before Mia's betrayal. As the night went on, laughter filled the room, conversations flowed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt normal. I wasn't just the guy whose wife had cheated on him. I was me, surrounded by people who knew me, who cared, who had stood by me even when my world fell apart. I realized then that Mia's betrayal, painful as it was, didn't define me. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of happiness. During the evening, I noticed a woman across the room. She had a bright smile, a warm laugh, and an energy that seemed to light up the room. I didn't know her, but our eyes met a few times, and each time, she'd smile, a soft, welcoming smile that made me feel seen. I wasn't looking for anything, my heart was still too bruised, too raw. But there was something about her, a quiet kindness that drew me in. Later, as the gathering began to wind down, Brian introduced us. Her name was Rachel. We exchanged a few words, small talk, really, but I could tell she wasn't prying, wasn't looking at me like someone to fix. She was just present, her eyes bright, her laugh genuine. We talked about music, books, the places we'd traveled. There was no pressure, no expectations, just an easy connection that felt refreshing, like a breath of fresh air. Over the next few weeks, we started meeting for coffee, sharing stories, finding common ground. I took it slow, careful not to let old wounds rush me into anything. Rachel understood. She listened without judgment, never asking for more than I was ready to give. With her, I felt like I could be myself again, not the husband betrayed, not the man scarred by heartbreak, but just me. As my life settled into a new normal, I found myself letting go of the anger and resentment that had once consumed me. I realized that Mia's betrayal had been a lesson, a harsh one, but one that had shown me who I was and what I deserved. It had revealed the strength I didn't know I had, the resilience that had carried me through. Months passed. The pain dulled to a distant ache, a memory that no longer had the power to break me. I saw Mia a few times around town, each encounter a fleeting moment that stirred nothing more than indifference. She was a chapter of my past, a story I'd told and moved on from. One evening, Rachel and I sat at a small cafe, sipping coffee as the sun dipped below the horizon. She looked at me, her gaze steady, and asked, "Do you ever think about her?" I thought about the question, letting the memories drift through my mind like leaves on the wind. Sometimes, I admitted, but not in the way I used to. She's part of my story, but she doesn't define it. I've moved on. And I'm grateful for what I've found since. Rachel smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. In that moment, I knew I was free, free from the anger, the pain, the betrayal. I had reclaimed my life, my heart, my future. Mia had once been my whole world, but now, she was just a memory, a lesson I'd learned and left behind. And as I sat there with Rachel, I realized that I had finally found peace. As peaceful as my new life was with Rachel, there was still an itch in the back of my mind. For months, I had focused on moving forward, rebuilding myself, and letting go of Mia's betrayal. But every so often, that quiet, nagging voice would remind me that Mia had never truly faced the depth of what she'd done. My initial confrontation, the smoke, the panic, it had been powerful, but brief. I realized that the revenge had only scratched the surface, barely digging into the layers of manipulation and lies she had crafted so easily. A thought began to form, taking root, evolving. This time, my revenge would be slower, more calculated, a message that would linger long after I was done. Mia had rebuilt her life, too, or so it seemed. She'd quickly moved on, crafting an image on social media of a woman who was thriving. Pictures of outings, work events, and new friends filled her profiles, each post an attempt to rewrite her story. It was as if she was trying to erase her mistakes, to sweep the past under the rug and pretend that it hadn't happened. But this new, polished version of herself, this empowered Mia, was a lie, and I knew it. She wasn't free. She was simply hiding behind a mask. So, I set the final stage. The first move was subtle, nearly invisible. I still had contacts in the same circles Mia ran in, acquaintances who were only too happy to indulge my curiosity. Through them, I heard about her latest big career move, at a new company, a place where she was putting on her best face, reinventing herself. She'd secured a management role, worked her way up with charm, and was adored by her new team. I'd even heard she was dating a junior employee, keeping her relationships private this time. It was almost perfect. Through a friend in IT, I managed to get information on her work emails. Nothing explicit, just hints that I knew her new life inside and out, reminders that the man she'd betrayed wasn't done yet. She began receiving anonymous messages, snippets of old conversations she'd had with Mark, fragments of texts she'd deleted long ago. Each message was carefully crafted, reeling her back into the past she wanted to forget. The beauty of it was the subtlety. There was nothing she could trace, nothing she could report without revealing her own mistakes. The pressure built slowly, with each message arriving at odd hours, often timed with big moments in her work life, a company presentation, an important pitch. Each notification was like a small bomb going off, rattling her, making her question how much of her life was really under her control. Then, I moved to phase 2, showing the cracks in her new relationship. This new boyfriend of hers, a younger guy with a reputation for being naive and eager to please, was completely oblivious to Mia's past. It didn't take long to arrange a meeting with him, a casual run-in at a coffee shop where I accidentally dropped hints about the woman he was dating. "She's got a complicated past," I told him, my tone friendly, as if I were offering him a bit of brotherly advice. "Just make sure she's being honest with you. She's known to keep a few secrets." He looked at me, puzzled, but I could see the curiosity, the doubt creeping into his mind. The seed was planted. Over the next few weeks, I knew he'd start to notice the signs, the late nights, the hidden phone calls, the moments of secrecy that Mia could never truly let go of. My final move was the most brutal, saved for when I knew she was beginning to crumble. I knew her company was throwing a formal event, a celebration of sorts for a successful quarter, and that she would be speaking. Through my connections, I managed to get an invitation as a +1. I brought Rachel, introducing her as my date, her elegance and warmth drawing attention from the moment we entered the room. Mia's face turned ashen when she saw us, her eyes widening as if she were seeing a ghost. As I moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries, I made sure she caught glimpses of Rachel and me together, laughing, sharing inside jokes, a natural, effortless bond she hadn't been able to destroy. Every time our eyes met across the room, I held her gaze, unflinching, making sure she understood that I was fully, completely beyond her grasp. The final blow came during her speech. She'd barely started, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness, when her phone, which she'd silenced, began vibrating insistently. The message was from me, a single line that read, "Your past always catches up to you." Attached was a blurry photo of her and Mark, taken during one of their secret meetings. It was a subtle enough image that only she would understand its meaning, but the effect was instant. She stammered, her voice faltering, eyes darting around the room, struggling to hold her composure. The room noticed. People murmured, watching as she fumbled, her polished persona cracking, her confidence evaporating in real time. Her speech fell apart, and she hastily excused herself, disappearing into the restroom. Rachel, sensing something was happening, looked at me, concern in her eyes. "Is everything all right?" I nodded, smiling softly. "More than all right," I said. And it was true. Watching Mia unravel, seeing her lose control in front of her carefully cultivated audience, felt like the closure I'd been searching for. Later that evening, as Rachel and I left the event, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I'd given Mia a taste of the destruction she'd brought into my life, forced her to confront her own weaknesses and lies. I didn't need to tear down her life entirely, just enough to remind her that actions have consequences, that betrayals leave scars not just on the betrayed, but on the betrayer. As Rachel and I walked into the cool night, she slipped her hand into mine, and I felt a peace settle over me, deeper than anything I'd known in a long time. The past, with all its pain, was finally behind me, a chapter fully closed. Mia's life would go on, just as mine would. But she would remember this night, the fear, the cracks in her polished facade. And I would remember it too, not with bitterness, but with the satisfaction of knowing that justice, however subtle, had been served. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. As I walked away from that final confrontation with Mia, hand in hand with Rachel, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of release, as if the final weight had been lifted. There was no need for more revenge, no lingering need for answers or closure. I had taken my power back, reclaimed my dignity, and, most importantly, I had moved forward. Life after betrayal isn't easy, and it isn't something that heals overnight. Betrayal leaves scars, some visible, others hidden deep within, and it changes you in ways you don't always realize. But, over time, I learned that it can also make you stronger, more resilient, more aware of your own worth. I found that once you move through the hurt, you come out the other side a different person, one who understands what real loyalty, real love, and real respect look like. For anyone who's been where I've been, who's been shattered by betrayal and felt like the world as they knew it had crumbled, there are a few things I learned that I hope can help. 1. Don't let the betrayal define you. When someone betrays you, it's easy to let that experience take over your identity, to feel like the hurt is all you are. But remember, their actions don't define you. You're still the person you were before, but stronger, wiser, and more capable of setting boundaries that protect your peace. Their betrayal is a reflection of their own weaknesses, not yours. 2. Take control of your own healing. Healing isn't passive, it's something you have to actively work at. Go to the gym, find new hobbies, lean on friends who truly care. Give yourself time, but don't let yourself be swallowed by the pain. Work on yourself, become the person you deserve to be, and you'll find that the betrayal loses its power over you. 3. Seek closure, but let go of justice. Revenge can feel satisfying in the moment, but ultimately, justice isn't something you can control. Sometimes, letting go is the most powerful form of closure you can find. Mia's world may or may not unravel further, that's up to her choices. But for me, letting go of the need for revenge allowed me to live fully again, free from the shackles of the past. 4. Surround yourself with people who have your back. Brian and Jake reminded me what real friendship looks like. Find those people, the ones who show up not just when things are good but when life falls apart. They'll help you remember who you are, and they'll be the ones pulling you out of the dark days. True friends help you see past the hurt, even when it feels impossible. 5. Don't rush into something new, but don't be afraid to love again. After betrayal, it's tempting to guard your heart and shut out anyone new. But real love, when you're ready for it, is worth the risk. I was careful with Rachel, and she was patient with me. Through her, I learned that love isn't about grand gestures or blind trust, it's about respect, honesty, and mutual care. Love doesn't mean forgetting the pain of the past, it means letting someone show you that it's safe to trust again. 6. Remember that moving on is the best revenge. Moving on, living well, finding peace and joy in your life, that's the real victory. It's the kind of revenge that doesn't require anger or games, it simply lets you reclaim your happiness. By building a new life with Rachel, I showed Mia, and myself, that her betrayal wasn't the end of my story. 7. Forgive, but don't forget. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what they did, it's about releasing yourself from the hold that pain has over you. It took time, but eventually, I forgave Mia, not to let her off the hook, but to free myself from the bitterness. I don't forget what she did, and I won't repeat the same mistakes. But forgiveness is a way of moving forward without letting the past hold you back. In the end, life has a way of restoring balance. Pain, heartbreak, betrayal, they all leave scars, but they don't define who you are unless you let them. I used to believe that betrayal marked the end, but I've come to see it as a beginning, a second chance to rediscover myself, to rebuild, and to live in a way that's true to who I am. So, if you're going through it, if you're in the middle of that hurt, hold on. Take your time. Heal in your own way. And one day, you'll wake up, and the pain will be a distant memory, a lesson learned, and you'll know that you made it through. Because you deserve a life filled with respect, love, and peace. And that's a future worth fighting for.